Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. A breaking news edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. With me is Kip Adams and Benjamin Wolk. As always, we know Georgia's fate and its destination in bowl season. Number 6, Georgia, will be playing number 5, Florida State, in the 2023 Orange Bowl. That game will be played Saturday, December 30th, Miami's Hard Rock Stadium. 4 p.m. Eastern Time will be televised on ESPN. Georgia misses out on the playoff, but is going to be playing one of the marquee New Year's Day bowls against a Florida State team that, fellas, as we were talking about before we started recording, has a lot to play for and something to prove. Kip, I'm going to start with you. Just what's your general reaction to the news? Georgia does not make the playoff. They are picked for the Orange Bowl and to play a Florida State team that finished the year undefeated and is probably going to try to make an argument for a national championship, even though they did not make the playoff.
I mean, Georgia fans and the program have every right to be disappointed. It's obviously a disappointing and devastating way to end the season, but you also just can't be surprised of today's outcome. I mean, even Kirby Smart knew last night that, his pitch for making the college football playoff was kind of a fool's errand, that their chances were slim. And he almost knew immediately at the end of that game. That game against Alabama was an elimination game for the playoff. You could argue whether it should have been, but again, Georgia won't get a chance to compete for the three-peat. And as you wrote in your column, Jordan, I mean, they have no one to blame but themselves. They had the opportunity to win and get in. That's the way it is. And they didn't. So, the SEC is still represented in this playoff. So the SEC championship can still be considered that playing game for this final year of the 4-team playoff. Alabama took Georgia's spot. And, I think Kirby Smart always talked about, humility is, only a week away, and last week's college football playoffs didn't matter. And I mean, that definitely showed true when you saw those rankings today. You saw the number 1 team dropping out of the playoffs for the first time ever. And you saw a team, go undefeated, win its conference championship, and still drop out of the playoff. So I think you just can't be surprised with the outcome. If you're a Georgia fan, you kind of knew this is the way it was going to go.
I may have misspoken there a few minutes ago. Florida State is number 5, the first team out of the playoff. Georgia, number 6. Ben, what were your thoughts on this game coming together? I think a pretty marquee game. Obviously, we don't know who will be playing and who will not be playing on both sides, but still pretty interesting to see the Bulldogs get matched up with the Seminoles.
I think it's a fascinating game, again, barring what the actual rosters look like for that game, because, Florida State, you could argue at a lot of these times, these New Year's Six bowl games, it feels like a lot of these Power 5 teams don't feel as incentivized or inspired to play in these games because they feel like they just missed out on something. I think that you oftentimes find that group of 5 team going up against the Power 5 team, and it's, that group of 5 team just has so much more juice because of how much more that game means to them. I find this one fascinating because I think this game means a lot to Florida State because of what just happened. The fact that they have a chance to go 14-0, I think there would be a lot of validation for them, whether, regardless of what Georgia's roster looks like for that game, if they beat Georgia, because the argument that Alabama really was hanging its hat on to get in over it was they just beat the number 1 team in the country, Georgia. And that's such a good win that it probably indicates that they're a better football team than Florida State. So we'll get into all of that I'm sure. But really for the purposes of this game, I'm fascinated to see what Georgia brings to Miami. How is it a fully stacked roster? Is it not? I think that it's unfortunate, obviously, that because of the nature of things, there are opt-outs and transfers and those types of conversations, and that's just going to have to happen, unfortunately. But I think there's a chance for this to be a really, really, really good New Year's Six matchup and an opportunity for both of these programs, I think, to sort of make one last statement after things went awry championship weekend.
I think that's a good point, and it will be interesting just who lines up for both these teams. And you even wonder, too, with Florida State, obviously Jordan Travis won't be playing in this one, but to get Tate Rodemaker back, that would be big after they struggled through that game against Louisville. This is just a matchup that I'm really interested in. I've always thought that this was a fun series, the few times these have been played. The last time Georgia played Florida State would have been the Sugar Bowl in 2003, I should say. Mark Richt against his mentor Bobby Bowden, and Georgia won that game. And as Kip said a few minutes ago, it's going to be really interesting to see how Georgia shows up, because I think it's easy to immediately think about that Sugar Bowl against Texas, where it just seemed like they weren't really all that interested in playing in that game, and some of the guys that wound up making the trip. And I do think that coming out of that, maybe Kirby Smart and that coaching staff learned a thing or two about how to handle those moments. Just missing out on going back to the playoff. It's going to be something to watch. And the nice thing is that time is on our side with this game. It's not till December 30th. A lot to dissect, a lot we will get into. Getting ready for that big game in Miami and seeing how Georgia ends this 2023 season. Guys, let's talk about how the college football playoff came together. The committee announced at noon, probably about 12:15, I should say, Eastern time today, who was going to be in the playoff. Number 1, Michigan. Number 2, Washington. Number 3, Texas. Number 4, Alabama. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure as we wrapped up Saturday night's podcast, we kind of landed on that being how it fell. Not necessarily what we thought it would, or what we thought it should be, but how we thought the committee would wind up putting things together. So I'll start with you, Kip. What did you make of how this playoff came together? Texas, Alabama is in. Florida State is the first one out, and Georgia is the one right after him.
It's definitely controversial. And I think in the end, they went with the combination of strength and of schedule with Alabama, and the fact that they've, in their opinion, this Florida State team was different than the one earlier in the season. But I guess, again, it's another situation where they kind of make up their own rules, because Florida State was the same team they were last week. We knew Jordan Travis was hurt last week, which was the entire, that's it. You should probably have paid attention to that and kind of known which direction you're going to go in whenever he got hurt, and reflected that in last week's rankings. So you put your foot in your own mouth, and you can't really back up what you've said when you come out with these rankings. You're supposed to value conference champions, your undefeated records. But I actually agree that the fact that the player is injured, this isn't the same team, and the best teams. But you have to kind of combine that, and you have to make that decision when it happens, and not you waited a week later. You look bad for it right now. You can't just look at the eye test and you can just make things as you go along. But at the same time, we've kind of acknowledged that that's what this committee's done every single year. The criteria is changed every single time. At the end of the day, they're just putting in who they want to put in. And so I think this is obviously the best advertisement possible for playoff expansion. I mentioned earlier that I thought that, Georgia's takedown of Ole Miss early in the season was a great advertisement for why you don't need expansion. But, the committee went ahead and gave us all a perfect reason to burn this system all down and, start anew, which probably another reason why they did it. They know that it's going away, so it doesn't really matter who they pick. They can pick who they want. They can pick their TV markets and everything and make the most money on the way out of this 4-team and then just move on to expansion and celebrate, making even more money. Because in the end, I think that's kind of what they're going for.
Kim Martin on Facebook says FSU should have been in. Lots of comments coming in just with how this playoff wound up. Ben, I've seen your tweets. I know you have thoughts. Just give us what you think of how the playoff came together with Alabama and Texas getting in, Florida State and Georgia being the top 2 teams on the outside looking in.
Well, I would like to start with a disclaimer that sometimes my tweets are nothing more than just that. They're just tweets. You two know how much I appreciate engagement. So sometimes I'm just out here for the engagement. That said, it's a complicated conversation. There's no denying how complicated of a conversation it is. You will not look at any football coach or any person that watches any of these things that says they would take Florida State to win a game against Alabama. I do not think that anybody really believes that Alabama would lose a neutral site matchup against Florida State right now. I'm sure there might be some folks out there that maybe do. I have not heard them. My thing on it is, again, I hate the whole best deserving. It's why the interviews with the committee chairman are just terrible, because they are getting grilled by Reese Davis and they say stupid things on TV all the time. And then for 8-10 years, we hold them accountable for one sentence that they delivered on national television while they're getting grilled on a show that they probably don't even want to be on in the first place. So it's just, for me, I thought that the easy decision would have actually been to just go with the 3 undefeated Power 5 champions and take the Texas head-to-head. Now, you would have been looking at Alabama and saying, the team that I think is the best team in the country after watching them play on Saturday, the best team in the country is not in the college football playoff. A lot of people would say that's wrong. If you think that Alabama is the best team in the country, they need to be in there. And I do believe that they're the best team in the country. I think I'm taking Alabama to win this whole thing. I would take Alabama after seeing them against Georgia in a neutral site matchup against every single team in college football, except for maybe Georgia, but that's a whole other conversation.
Would you take Georgia in the Alabama over Georgia if Georgia heals up and is in the college football playoff? And with that being said, should we just let Vegas decide who makes it? Because it sounds like we're saying that who would be favored is who should play. So maybe we should just let the sports books decide who the top 4 teams are.
Well, that's my thing, Kip. It's like at every single week, at the end of every single week this season, regardless of results, if you were to say to me, who are the best teams out there? I'd be like, well, probably Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State, because they're always the best teams out there. And so I don't want to be in the camp of like the games have to matter. The game should matter. I think it's a more complicated conversation than that. But I do think that if you go undefeated in the Power 5 conference, they played 2 SEC teams. They won, and also I realize they're not the same team without Jordan Travis. I do appreciate that. They also have given up 21 points since he got hurt. It's like they have an entire unit of the football team that has played at an elite level the last 2 weeks. And you can say, they played Florida, they played Louisville, whatever. Alabama gave up 24 points per game in the 2 weeks since then. So it's like there are plenty of arguments that you can make in terms of the on-field product and what we've seen. Now, do I think that Florida State's better than Alabama? No. And that's why a lot of people would probably look at me and be like, you're being such a hypocrite in what your opinion is on any of this, because if I think that Alabama's better, they should just be in. Well, guess what? I think Georgia's better than Washington too, but I don't think Georgia should be in the playoff over Washington. That's just how I feel about these things. And I think that Florida State probably got screwed in this more than just about any team has gotten screwed in all of this. And again, to Kip's point, it's probably a great advertisement for the 12-team playoff. It's not a conversation that will be these types of conversations won't be the same. And I guess really, I give the committee some credit, I guess, for making the difficult or choice that was going to make all the vitriol. Because I think if we're sitting here today and it's the 3 undefeated Power 5 champs and Texas who won the head-to-head against Alabama, everyone would Alabama fans might be a little bit peeved about it, but I think everyone would be sitting here saying, well, you probably shouldn't have lost to Texas. You don't lose to Texas. It's as simple as that. And I will also say for the Georgia folks that are listening to this, if Alabama had beaten Texas, I think that Georgia and Alabama would both be in this playoff. So Georgia can thank Alabama for losing that game.
Also, let's point out how different this would have looked if Auburn had not sent 2 and spied a guy on 4th and 31. I mean, maybe it complicates it.
Also, if Georgia wins yesterday, I guess Florida State's still out. They were. I mean, their fate was set last week when they were still ranked, in the top 4. Their fate was already set, because if Georgia wins against Alabama, Georgia's number 1, Texas is number 4, Florida State's still out. So I think, did yesterday even matter? It was just who makes it in from the SEC. And so it just kind of goes back to what does matter. I don't think we know. It kind of puts like a bookend on this 4-team playoff to it's just been a decade of chaos. The BCS was probably better, and now we'll be arguing over 8 and 3. Whether Ole Miss, Missouri, these top 12 teams deserve to be in, and we'll be getting mad about the group of 5 entry into the playoffs. So it'll be a completely new argument, but it still seems like it's going to be a huge mess.
I feel terrible for Jordan Travis. Really, that's my big thing in all of this is like, and I tweeted about this, but I mean, he's sitting there around all of his teammates. He broke his leg. He's probably been depressed for 3 weeks because his college football career is over. He's hurt. He's going to have to recover to get to where he wants to go if he's going to have a chance in the NFL. And all he's hearing on TV is your team can't make the playoffs because you broke your leg. And I don't want to get, I've seen this out there too since then, but I don't want to get into the whole, like, should Florida State have lied about his injury, even though we all watched his leg snap on TV? It's, Kirby says everybody's day to day, everybody's week to week. If Jordan Travis is day to day, week to week right now, how does that muddy the decision for the committee? I don't know. I just think it's tough. But again, it's a precedent that's set that will not impact any other college football season ever, because there will never be a college football season or committee process or 14 playoff like this ever again. So
Mike Norvell is watching Kirby Smart press conferences and writing down, "We're hopeful," over and over, and just like 100 times in a notebook, like he's Bart Simpson. I did want to read just this one sentence from what Jordan Travis tweeted after it was announced that Florida State did not make the playoff. Just this one sentence. "I wish my leg broke earlier in the season so y'all could see this team is much more than the quarterback." Can we just wrap our head around how sad that sentence is? Whether you are a diehard Florida State fan or you're like, good, I'm glad the Seminoles got kept out of this. I wish my leg broke earlier in the season. That's up there with "baby shoes for sale, never worn." One of the just saddest sentences I've ever heard.
I think my issue with all of this, I think I obviously agree with everyone that Alabama's better, but like, isn't the whole idea of the playoff where it's like, okay, we're not sure if Florida State is better, but they're undefeated. It's like, we can make these assumptions about them being good enough or not being good enough, or they could just go play Michigan and we could find out. It's like, what's an awesome way to determine whether Florida State, undefeated Power 5 champion, is good enough to win a national championship? Let them play in the semifinal. Like, I really do think it's ridiculous that we have a playoff and then they don't get to play off for anything.
No, I think it's a fair point. And I also want to shout out Booger McFarland, because I thought he was speaking a lot of truth on the committee show. And he was still going, when they were going through the New Year's 6 games, he was still cracking jokes. You could hear people laughing on set at him saying stuff. It was too good. Let's get ready to wrap this episode up. Obviously, we are going to dive into a ton of previews with the Bulldogs and the Seminoles over the course of this upcoming month. And we'll have you in the know and all the updates on who's playing, who's not. I did want to say this from post-game after the SEC championship game. Running back Kendall Milton told reporters that he would play in the bowl game if Georgia was not in the college football playoff. So that will be big, having the senior running back play there, and we'll keep an eye out for other announcements, whether guys are playing or whether guys are not. I'll throw it to you first, Kip. Any parting thoughts on this bowl pick for Georgia, or just on how this playoff was set up and what we're getting ready to see in about a month's time?
I mean, it's just another challenge to both programs as far as their culture and, their ability to motivate their players. Again, I'm not trying to say anything negative towards, non-playoff bowl games. We've all grown up watching them. We can get into how many there should be, if everyone should be in a bowl, if there are too many. But this is still, the chance for guys to go out there and compete again in college football. A lot of them for the last time, guys who aren't going to the NFL. And at the same time, it's obviously a peek ahead to next year and seeing, the young players on both these rosters. And so for fans, I mean, there's, I see people talking about boycotting on the Florida State side. And I know that, they're in the 24-hour period that we always give people to react, and they have a reason to be very upset. And Georgia's still they're still in shock over, being 2 plays away from being in the playoffs themselves. But you do have to remember everything these guys fought for all season, and respect the fact that you follow a program, you're very passionate about it. There's still a lot for both of these teams to play for, because these practices are important, and this is how you get that scouting look for next year. So there's a lot of value in this game. We're obviously going to find out who all is playing, who all is opting out. But I think these are 2 very proud programs, and if you just said Georgia and Florida State are playing in 2024, it would be a game that, the ticket prices would be going through the roof. I mean, if this was a regular season game. And I think you have to remind yourself that this is a very interesting, intriguing matchup. And I think it's going to be an outstanding football game against two very, very talented rosters and coaching staffs.
Ben, before I let you dive in, can you give me an example of a team from the state of Florida that got left out of the college football playoff, that played an SEC team in bowl season, and wound up claiming a national championship?
Yeah, our 2017 UCF Golden Knights. I covered
Georgia,
that bowl game against Auburn as well. I was covering Auburn at the time.
Yeah, I think I was there for the Columbus newspaper. And look, Georgia can obviously do something about preventing that from happening, but just want to throw that out there. The blueprint is there in the Sunshine State. Ben, any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
Well, actually, if Florida State does beat Georgia, I fully advocate for them claiming a national championship. I'm in for as much chaos as possible. That said, I think I can officially throw out everything that I've said through the first 20 minutes of this podcast about Florida State and say that I think regardless of what roster Georgia brings to that game, that Georgia's a better football team. I think I saw the 12-point opening line potentially, or a potential opening line. I think Georgia's going to win this game handily, regardless of who it is that plays in this game. I think Georgia's the better team. I think Georgia's going to do a solid favor for the committee and say, yeah, Florida State should not have probably been in the playoff. And I think that Alabama will probably do hold up their end of the bargain as well, in validating the committee's decision and what they have to do in their games too. So I think ultimately the committee is going to come out feeling pretty good about all of this, because I do think that Georgia takes care of Florida State. Alabama takes care of whoever it is they run into in the playoffs.
I am just going to say that before the season, I said Georgia was going to be playing Florida State in the postseason. Now, I had that in the Sugar Bowl, so I'll take half credit. And I will just say, too, man, this would be a really interesting matchup if Jordan Travis was healthy. I think this would be a very, very marquee bowl game.
Yeah, unfortunately, if Jordan Travis was healthy, there would have been, they'd be in the playoff, because that was the only explanation for why a Florida State team couldn't deserve to be in a playoff after going 13-0. All right, I'll leave it at that.
We'll wrap it up right there with some great insight from our guy, Ben Wolk. Appreciate everybody for tuning in, watching this live, everyone who's listening to this after the fact. If you haven't already, go to Dawgs247.com. Go subscribe. Keep an eye out. We may have a deal coming up with the transfer portal getting ready to open on Monday. And also keep an eye out over on Dogs 24/7 on YouTube. Got all the Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews, and also Mike White press conferences, Georgia men's basketball player interviews as well. So for Kip Adams and Benjamin Wolk, I am Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.